Homeless girl betrayed by family offers baby to billionaire CEO. His discovery shattered him. Do you know what betrayal tastes like? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Have you ever wondered what it takes to break a billionaire? What force could shatter a man who commands boardrooms and controls empires worth more than entire countries' budgets? The answer might surprise you. Sometimes it's not a hostile takeover or a market crash. Sometimes it's the simple act of stepping outside on a December night when the snow falls heavy enough to muffle the sound of your world crashing down. Alexander Blackwood had just signed the papers that dissolved his 5-year marriage. The ink was still wet on documents that split his $8 billion empire down the middle. Victoria had taken everything she could legally claim, including custody of 5-year-old Sophia. The little girl Alexander had raised as his own daughter until a paternity test revealed she belonged to another man entirely. Do you know what betrayal tastes like? It's metallic. Like blood in your mouth after being punched in the gut by someone you trusted completely. Manhattan's financial district was already emptying as Alexander stepped out of his lawyer's office. The December wind cut through his cashmere coat like it was tissue paper, but he barely noticed. Physical cold couldn't compete with the ice that had formed around his heart over the past 6 months of legal battles and discovered lies. His Bentley sat waiting, engine running, heated seats ready to transport him back to a penthouse that would echo with the absence of everything he'd lost. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the way the snowflakes caught the streetlight. Or maybe it was the realization that going home meant facing the crushing silence of his new reality. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint it almost got lost in the wind. A baby's cry, coming from somewhere in the darkness between buildings. Most successful men in Alexander's position would have kept walking. New York City was full of problems that weren't their responsibility, and getting involved with strangers rarely ended well for people with something to lose. But Alexander had already lost everything that mattered to him, which left him with a dangerous kind of freedom. He followed the sound into an alley that ran alongside his building, where luxury met desperation in the shadows between streetlights. What he found there would change his life in ways no business deal or financial triumph ever could. Huddled against the brick wall, barely visible in the swirling snow, sat a little girl who couldn't have been older than 7. Her long brown hair was matted with ice crystals, and her blue eyes, the most piercing blue he'd ever seen, looked up at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope that hit him like a physical blow. In her arms, wrapped in what appeared to be every piece of fabric she could find, was a baby who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. The infant's cries were growing weaker by the minute, and the girl's lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. "Please, mister," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "My baby brother needs help. I can't keep him warm anymore." At that moment, Alexander Blackwood, king of corporate strategy, a man who could read market trends like prophecy, found himself completely unprepared for the next 5 words that would haunt him forever. "Please don't let him die. What would you sacrifice to save someone you love? Your pride? Your future? Your very identity?" Most of us will never face such an impossible choice. But for 7-year-old Luna Morrison, that moment had arrived in a snow-covered alley, where death whispered promises in the December wind. Alexander knelt beside the children, his expensive Italian leather shoes disappearing into the snow that had become their bed. Up close, the reality of their situation hit him with devastating clarity. The little girl wore nothing but a thin knit hat and an oversized sweater that hung past her knees like a dress. No jacket, no shoes that he could see. Her small body shook with violent tremors that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the hypothermia that was slowly shutting down her system. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Alexander asked, his voice gentler than it had been in months. "Luna," she managed through chattering teeth. "This is Tommy. He's my baby brother." The baby in her arms had stopped crying, which Alexander recognized as a bad sign. Infants didn't go quiet from contentment in situations like this. They went quiet when their bodies began surrendering to conditions no child should ever have to endure. "Luna, when did you last eat something?" The question seemed to confuse her, as if the concept of regular meals had become foreign. "Tommy had formula yesterday morning. I found some crackers behind the restaurant, but they were all green and fuzzy. I gave him water from the park fountain. but he keeps making these little sounds like he's hurting inside. Alexander felt something crack in his chest. Not his ribs, but something deeper and more fundamental. What about you? When did you eat? Luna's eyes darted away from his face. I'm not hungry. Tommy needs food more than me. He's just a baby. The lie was so obvious it was painful. This child was starving herself to give her infant brother whatever scraps she could find, and she was trying to convince a stranger that she was fine, while her body consumed itself to stay alive. Luna, how long have you been out here? Since Cheryl left us at the motel. She said she paid for 3 nights, but the man came on the second day and said we had to go. That was... Luna's face scrunched up as she tried to calculate time in a world where days blended into an endless struggle for survival. Maybe 2 weeks ago? I stopped counting after Tommy got sick. 2 weeks. These children had been surviving on the streets of Manhattan for 2 weeks, and somehow this 7-year-old had kept herself and an infant alive through sheer force of will and love. But love couldn't generate body heat. Love couldn't produce food from empty air. Love couldn't reverse hypothermia or cure starvation. And Alexander could see that Luna's strength was finally reaching its limits. Luna, listen to me very carefully. You and Tommy need help right now. Real help. She looked up at him with those devastating blue eyes, and what she said next would echo in Alexander's mind for the rest of his life. Mister, you look important. Rich. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Please, take Tommy. I'll do anything you want. I'll clean your house every day for free. I'll be invisible. Just please, make sure he's warm and fed. Please don't let him die, because I wasn't good enough to take care of him. The raw desperation in her voice. The selfless love that made a starving child willing to give up the only family she had left. It shattered every defense Alexander had built around his heart. No, he said firmly. Luna's face crumpled, and she pulled Tommy closer to her chest. Please, I'm begging you. No, Alexander repeated, reaching out to touch her frozen cheek. I'm not taking Tommy from you. I'm taking both of you home. Can luxury feel like a crime? Alexander's penthouse had never seemed more obscene than it did the moment he carried Luna while she clutched Tommy against her chest. Every marble surface, every priceless piece of art, every floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park felt like evidence of a world that could allow children to freeze in alleys while others slept in rooms larger than most apartments. Mrs. Rodriguez, his housekeeper, had left hours earlier, but Alexander managed to navigate his own kitchen like an amateur in a foreign country. When was the last time he'd actually prepared food instead of having it prepared for him? When was the last time he'd done anything with his own hands, besides sign checks and shake hands in boardroom deals? Luna sat on his plush leather sofa, still wearing that oversized sweater that served as her only protection against the world. She ate soup with careful, measured spoonfuls, clearly forcing herself to go slowly when every cell in her body screamed for sustenance. Her discipline was heartbreaking. Even starving, she maintained control. Tommy drank formula from a bottle Alexander had ordered delivered within an hour, along with diapers, clothes, and everything else 2 homeless children might need. The baby's color had already improved, and his cries had transformed from the weak mewling of desperation to the robust demands of a healthy infant. Luna, Alexander said gently, settling into the chair across from her, can you tell me what happened to your family? The little girl finished her soup before answering, her manners impeccable despite everything she'd endured. Where had she learned such careful politeness? What kind of upbringing produced a child who said please and thank you, even while begging for her brother's life? My daddy, well, he wasn't my real daddy, but he married Mommy when I was 3. He used to work construction, big buildings downtown. Luna's voice carried the careful cadence of someone who'd told this story before, probably to social workers or police officers who'd asked the same questions. Then Mommy got sick with the cancer and went to heaven when I was 5. She paused to adjust Tommy in her arms, her movements practiced and protective. Daddy was real sad after Mommy died, but he took good care of me. Then he met Cheryl at his work, and she was nice at first. She moved in with us, and when Tommy was born she seemed happy. But then Daddy had his accident. Alexander leaned forward slightly. What kind of accident? A crane fell at the construction site. The police said Daddy died right away. That it didn't hurt. Luna's voice remained steady, but tears started sliding down her cheeks. Cheryl cried for 3 whole days. Then her boyfriend Marcus came over, and he said he didn't sign up for taking care of other people's kids. Rage built in Alexander's chest, not the cold, calculated anger he used in business negotiations, but something hot and protective that he'd never experienced before. So she just abandoned you? She said she was sorry, but she had to think about her future. She took some of Tommy's things to sell, his crib and high chair and toys, left us at a motel and said she'd paid for 3 nights. Luna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. That was maybe 2 weeks ago. When the motel man made us leave, I tried to take care of Tommy by myself. 2 weeks. This child had kept herself and an infant alive on the streets for 2 weeks, and she was apologizing for not doing better. Luna, do you have any other family, anyone at all? She shook her head. Just me and Tommy now. But that's okay, we take care of each other. Looking at this brave little girl who'd sacrificed everything for her baby brother, Alexander felt something shift deep inside his chest. Not breaking this time, but healing. Do you believe in divine intervention? In moments when the universe conspires to put exactly the right people in exactly the right place at precisely the moment when everything depends on that impossible timing? Alexander Blackwood had built his fortune on logic, market analysis, and calculated risks. But as he watched Luna sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, Tommy safely in her arms, he couldn't shake the feeling that forces beyond his understanding had orchestrated their meeting. The next morning brought a parade of experts to Alexander's penthouse. Dr. Patricia Huang arrived first, her medical bag and gentle demeanor immediately putting Luna at ease. The examination revealed what Alexander had feared. Luna was severely underweight and showed signs of prolonged exposure and malnutrition. But miraculously, Tommy was in better condition. She's been giving him everything, Dr. Huang explained privately to Alexander. Every scrap of food, every warm spot she could find, every ounce of protection her body could provide. This little girl has been functioning as a human shield for her brother. The second visitor was Robert Sterling, Alexander's attorney and longtime friend. Robert had handled Alexander's divorce with professional efficiency, but his expression now carried a different kind of concern. Alexander, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering, Robert said as they stood in Alexander's study while Luna and Tommy napped in the guest room. Are you certain about this? Taking in 2 children you found on the street? Children with no legal connection to you? It's going to complicate your life in ways you haven't considered. Alexander looked out the window at the city where these children had nearly died. Complicate how? Custody battles with relatives who might surface. Background checks that could reveal information you're not prepared for. And frankly, the timing concerns me. Your divorce was finalized yesterday. You're emotionally vulnerable right now, and making major life decisions when I'm what? Alexander's voice carried an edge that made Robert pause. When you're hurting, Robert finished quietly. Alexander, I've known you for 15 years. I've never seen you make an impulsive decision about anything, but this, bringing home 2 children you met 12 hours ago? This isn't like you. Alexander considered his friend's words. Robert was right about the impulsiveness, but he was wrong about the motivation. You think I'm trying to replace Sophia? I think you're trying to fill a void that Victoria and her betrayal left behind. And these children deserve better than being emotional band-aids for a wounded billionaire. The words stung because they contained just enough truth to hurt. Alexander had been devastated by losing Sophia, the little girl he'd raised and loved as his own daughter. But his connection to Luna and Tommy felt different. Not like replacement, but like recognition. Robert, let me ask you something. If you found children dying in the snow, would you walk away? Of course not. But I'd call social services, make sure they got proper care through the appropriate channels. The appropriate channels that have been failing these kids for weeks? Alexander's voice hardened. The system that let a 7-year-old and an infant survive on the streets of Manhattan while bureaucrats shuffled paperwork? Robert raised his hands in surrender. Okay, you're right about that. But Alexander, if you're serious about this, really serious, then we need to do it right. Full background investigation, proper legal procedures, psychological evaluations for everyone involved. Alexander nodded slowly. Whatever it takes. But Robert, I need you to understand something. This isn't about replacing what I lost. It's about recognizing what I found. As if summoned by their conversation, Luna appeared in the doorway of the study, her hair now clean and braided, wearing clothes that actually fit her small frame. "Mr. Alexander?" she said quietly. "Tommy's awake and I think he needs a diaper change. I know how to do it, but I couldn't find where you keep them." The formal way she addressed him, the careful politeness of a child who'd learned that adults could disappear without warning, it made Alexander's decision crystal clear. "Luna, you can call me Alexander, and this is your home now, for as long as you need it to be." Her blue eyes widened with hope, so fragile it could shatter. "Really? You won't send us away?" "Never," Alexander promised. "You and Tommy are safe here." For the first time since he'd found them, Luna smiled. What secrets hide in the shadows of every family's history? What truths lie buried beneath years of carefully constructed narratives and comfortable assumptions? Alexander Blackwood was about to discover that some investigations reveal far more than anyone expects or wants to know. Detective Sarah Mitchell specialized in cases that other investigators found too complicated or emotionally messy to handle. Her background in child welfare and family services made her the perfect choice for Robert's thorough approach to Luna and Tommy's situation. But as she sat across from Alexander in his office 3 weeks later, her expression carried the weight of discoveries that would reshape everything he thought he knew. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, opening a thick manila folder, "I need to share some information with you, and I'm afraid it's going to be difficult to hear." Alexander felt his stomach tighten. Over the past few weeks, Luna and Tommy had become the center of his world. Luna was incredibly bright, reading at a level far beyond her years and showing curiosity about everything around her. Tommy had regained his health completely, and now filled the penthouse with laughter that Alexander had never realized was missing from his life. "What did you find?" he asked. Detective Mitchell pulled out several documents. "First, the good news. Everything Luna told you about her father's death and Cheryl's abandonment is accurate. David Morrison died in an industrial accident 6 weeks ago. Cheryl Watson and her boyfriend Marcus Chen are currently living in Florida, having made no attempt to contact or reclaim the children." "That's what I expected," Alexander said. "What's the concerning part?" Mitchell hesitated, then pulled out a photograph. "Mr. Blackwood, this is a picture of Luna's biological mother, Rebecca Morrison, who died 3 years ago." Alexander looked at the photo and felt the world shift beneath his feet. The woman in the picture had long brown hair and piercing blue eyes identical to Luna's. But there was something else, something familiar about her features that made his heart race with impossible recognition. "Her maiden name," Mitchell continued quietly, "was Rebecca Blackwood." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. "That's not possible." "I'm afraid it is. Rebecca Blackwood was your half-sister, Mr. Blackwood. She was born from an affair your father had when you were 15 years old. According to the records I found, your father provided financial support for Rebecca's education until she turned 18, but she was never officially acknowledged as part of the family." Alexander's mind reeled. He had vague memories of his father mentioning complications from his past, late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when Alexander entered the room, unexplained financial transfers that his father had dismissed as charity donations. But he'd never pressed for details, assuming they involved business matters that didn't concern him. "That means," Alexander began but couldn't finish the sentence. "Luna is your niece," Mitchell confirmed gently, "and Tommy is your nephew. They're not just children you rescued, Mr. Blackwood. They're your family. They're Blackwoods." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd found these children by chance, been moved by their desperate situation, and fallen completely in love with them as if they were his own. Now he discovered they actually were his own. His blood, his father's legacy made flesh in the form of 2 children who'd nearly died in the snow. But with that knowledge came crushing guilt. How many times had his father traveled across the city to see Rebecca? How many birthdays and holidays had she spent wondering why her father couldn't acknowledge her publicly? How had Luna's mother felt, knowing her wealthy half-brother lived in luxury, while she struggled to make ends meet working 2 jobs just to survive? Alexander had the resources to investigate anything, to find anyone. He could have discovered Rebecca's existence years ago if he'd tried. Instead, she'd died in poverty, never reaching out to the family that might have helped her, while her daughter grew up not knowing she had an uncle who could have changed their lives with a single phone call. The children he'd rescued weren't strangers after all. They were the family he'd never known he'd lost. Have you ever watched someone fall in love with life again? That's exactly what happened to Alexander Blackwood during those magical December weeks leading up to Christmas. The penthouse had transformed into something unrecognizable. Gone were the sterile marble surfaces and cold modern art. In their place stood a massive Christmas tree that Luna had insisted they pick out together, its branches heavy with ornaments she'd made in her tutoring sessions. Tommy's baby toys scattered across Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars, and Alexander couldn't have been happier about it. Every evening, Alexander found himself racing home from board meetings and conference calls, eager to see what new discovery Luna had made or what milestone Tommy had reached. The baby had started pulling himself up to standing, much to Luna's delight, and she would spend hours encouraging his wobbly attempts at walking. But it was Luna who truly amazed him. At 8 years old, she read voraciously, devouring everything from fairy tales to books about astronomy. Her questions were endless and profound. Alexander, if stars are so far away that their light takes years to reach us, does that mean we're looking at the past when we look at the sky? The gifts under the tree multiplied daily. Alexander had gone completely overboard, hiring personal shoppers to find everything 2 children could possibly want. Dolls and books for Luna, educational toys and soft animals for Tommy, clothes and games and gadgets that filled every corner of their new bedrooms. Yet something nagged at him during those perfect weeks. Luna would sometimes catch him watching her with an expression he couldn't quite read. She'd grown quieter as Christmas approached, more thoughtful, as if she were working through some complex problem in her brilliant young mind. The night before Christmas Eve, Alexander found her sitting by her bedroom window, looking out at the falling snow, the same kind of snow that had brought them together just weeks before. "Luna? What's wrong, sweetheart?" She turned to him with those impossibly blue eyes that seemed to hold far too much wisdom for someone so young. "Alexander, my daddy used to tell me something when things seemed too perfect. He said, if something looks too good to be true, it probably is." The words hit him like ice water. "What do you mean?" She gestured around the room filled with more luxury than most adults ever experience. "You, us, this whole life. It feels like a dream, and I keep waiting to wake up." Alexander sat beside her on the window seat, his heart breaking. "Luna, this isn't a dream. This is real. We're real, but you're so important, so rich, so everything. And we're nobody. What if you get tired of us? What if we become too much trouble?" Her small voice cracked with vulnerability. Cheryl said nobody would ever want kids that weren't really theirs. Do you know someone who's experienced this kind of fear? That moment when happiness feels too fragile to trust?
Alexander pulled her close, struggling to find words that could heal wounds carved by abandonment and loss. What he said next would determine whether this little girl could ever truly believe in love again. Can you imagine discovering that everything you thought you knew about your life was wrong? That's exactly what happened to Alexander Blackwood on a cold January morning that changed everything. The call came at 7 a.m. Detective Sarah Mitchell's voice was tight, with the kind of tension that comes from uncovering secrets people have died to protect. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to see you immediately. What I've found, it's going to change everything about this adoption case." An hour later, Alexander sat in his office staring at a manila folder that might as well have contained dynamite. Sarah's face was grave as she spread photographs and documents across his mahogany desk. "I've been thorough, Mr. Blackwood, maybe too thorough. What I discovered goes far beyond the simple abandonment case we thought we were dealing with." She pulled out a photograph, a woman with long brown hair and piercing blue eyes that Alexander recognized instantly. The resemblance to Luna was unmistakable, but there was something else, something that made his chest tighten with recognition. "This is Rebecca Morrison, Luna's mother. She died 3 years ago from pneumonia, couldn't afford proper medical care." Sarah paused, watching Alexander's reaction carefully. Her maiden name was Rebecca Blackwood. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly airless room. Alexander's coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers. shattering against the floor. That's impossible. I wish it were. Sarah pulled out a birth certificate, hospital records, a paper trail that painted a devastating picture. She was born in 1985. Her mother was Elena Vasquez, a housekeeper who worked for your family when you were 15. Alexander's world tilted on its axis. He remembered Elena, a kind woman who'd worked for his father for less than a year before disappearing suddenly. He'd never thought to ask why. Her father paid for Rebecca's education, her living expenses, everything, but there were conditions. She could never contact your family. She could never acknowledge the connection. She was to live her life as if the Blackwood name meant nothing to her. My father knew. Alexander's voice came out as a whisper, loading Tassa's menu. And he made sure she knew that reaching out to you would mean losing all financial support. So she took his money until she turned 18, then cut all ties, worked 2 jobs to put herself through community college, married David Morrison, had Luna. The photographs told a story of struggle and pride. Rebecca working at a diner, Rebecca in a graduation cap at nursing school, Rebecca holding baby Luna with exhausted but loving eyes. She could have contacted me at any time, Alexander said, his voice hollow. I would have helped her. Would you have? Sarah's question was gentle but pointed. 3 years ago, before your divorce, before everything fell apart, would you have opened your heart to a sister you'd never known and her child? The brutal honesty of it hit Alexander like a physical blow. 3 years ago, he'd been consumed with building his empire, maintaining his marriage, keeping up appearances. Would he have risked scandal for a sister he'd never met? She was proud, Sarah continued. Proud and stubborn and determined to make it on her own. Sound familiar? Alexander stared at the photographs, seeing his own eyes reflected in Rebecca's face, recognizing the set of her jaw that Luna had inherited. His sister, his blood, his family that he'd never known existed. There's more, Sarah said quietly. Luna isn't just your niece, Mr. Blackwood. According to your father's will as his biological granddaughter, she's entitled to a portion of the Blackwood family trust. Have you ever felt the weight of missed opportunities crushing down on you? Alexander Blackwood was about to discover just how much his family's secrets had cost them all. The question that would haunt him forever. How many other secrets had his father taken to the grave? What do you do when you discover that your greatest blessing was born from your family's greatest failure? Alexander Blackwood was about to find out. That night, Alexander couldn't bring himself to go home. He sat in his office as darkness fell over Manhattan, staring at the photographs of the sister he'd never known. Rebecca's face haunted him, so much like Luna's, but marked by struggles he could have prevented. His father had been dead for 10 years, taking his secrets to the grave. Charles Blackwood, the man Alexander had idolized, had fathered a daughter and then forced her to live in the shadows. How many nights had Rebecca fallen asleep, wondering why her father was ashamed of her? How many times had she walked past Blackwood Industries, knowing her own blood built that empire, but that she could never claim it? When Alexander finally returned to the penthouse, he found Luna reading in the library, while Tommy slept peacefully in his crib nearby. She looked up with that brilliant smile that never failed to warm his heart, but tonight it also broke it. Alexander, I was wondering when you'd come home. Tommy learned a new word today. He said Lulu when he saw me. He sat beside her, studying the face that was suddenly more familiar than ever. She had Rebecca's eyes, Charles Blackwood's stubborn chin, and something indefinably his own in the way she tilted her head when thinking. Luna, I learned something today about your mother. Something important? Her expression became serious, setting down her book with the careful attention she gave to adult conversations. What kind of something? Your mother was my sister, my half-sister. We had the same father. Luna was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the remarkable composure that continually amazed him. So, we were already family before you found us? Yes, we were always family. Did you know about Mommy? The simple question cut deeper than any accusation could have. No, sweetheart. My father never told me about her. I'm so sorry. If I had known, I would have helped. I would have made sure you and your mother never struggled. Luna studied his face with those wise blue eyes. But you didn't know because Grandpa Charles didn't want you to know? The way she said it, without blame or anger, just seeking to understand, made Alexander's throat tighten. That's right. Your grandfather made it so your mother couldn't tell anyone about our family connection. Because he was ashamed of us? The brutal directness of the question knocked the breath from Alexander's lungs. How could he explain the complexities of pride and reputation and social expectations to an 8-year-old who'd survived on the streets? I think he was ashamed of himself, Alexander said finally. Sometimes grown-ups make terrible choices because they're afraid of what other people will think. Luna nodded solemnly, then surprised him by crawling onto his lap. Alexander, do you think Mommy sent you to find us in the snow? What do you mean? Maybe she knew we needed each other. Maybe she knew you were sad, too, and that taking care of us would make you happy again out of the mouths of babes. Alexander held her close, marveling at how this child could find meaning and purpose in tragedy, could transform family shame into family blessing. But even as he held her, one question burned in his mind. Who else knew about Luna's true identity? And what would they do with that knowledge? Have you ever received a message from someone you've lost that changes everything you thought you knew? Luna Blackwood was about to experience exactly that. The box had been sitting in storage for months, belongings salvaged from the apartment Luna had shared with her father and stepmother. Cheryl had left most of it behind, considering it junk not worth selling. But Luna had insisted on going through every item, hoping to find some connection to the mother she missed desperately. Most of it was exactly what Cheryl had assumed: old clothes, broken toys, household items of no value. But at the very bottom, wrapped in a faded pillowcase, Luna discovered a small wooden jewelry box. This was Mommy's, she whispered, running her fingers over the carved roses on its surface. Daddy gave it to me after she died, but Cheryl said it was ugly and old. Alexander watched as Luna opened the box with reverent care. Inside were a few pieces of inexpensive jewelry, some photographs, and an envelope that made his heart stop. Written in careful script across the front were the words, "My dearest Luna, to be opened if Mommy goes to heaven." She wrote me a letter, Luna said softly, her eyes filling with tears. Will you read it to me? Alexander's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. The letter inside was written on simple notebook paper, but the words carried the weight of a mother's love and desperation. My dearest Luna, he began, his voice thick with emotion. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, and I'm so sorry for that. I want you to know that every day I had with you was the greatest gift of my life. Luna leaned against him as he continued reading, her small body tense with attention. There are things about our family that I never told you because I wanted to protect you from disappointment. But if something happens to me, you might need to know the truth. Your grandfather was a man named Charles Blackwood. He was very wealthy and powerful, but he was also married to someone else when he fell in love with my mother. Alexander's voice caught. Rebecca had known. She'd known about the family connection all along. I was born from that love, but I was never acknowledged as his daughter. When I turned 18, Charles offered me money to go to college, to start a business, to live comfortably, but there was a condition. I could never contact his legitimate family. I could never tell his son Alexander that he had a sister. The letter went on to explain Rebecca's choice: pride over pragmatism, independence over security. She'd known exactly who Alexander was, where to find him, how to contact him. But she'd chosen to struggle alone rather than risk rejection. If you ever find yourself alone and scared, Luna, know that you have family. You have an uncle named Alexander Blackwood who lives in Manhattan. He's very wealthy and powerful, just like his father was. I don't know what kind of man he is, but you, my darling girl, are a Blackwood. You have the right to that name. When Alexander finished reading, Luna was crying silently. She knew about you the whole time. She knew, Alexander confirmed, his own eyes burning. But she was too proud to ask for help. Just like you were too proud to beg when I found you in the snow. The parallel hit them both simultaneously. Pride, the Blackwood family curse that had kept them apart and nearly cost them everything. Do you know how it feels when your past comes back to destroy your future? Alexander Blackwood was about to learn that some people never stop looking for ways to profit from others' pain. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 months after the adoption had been finalized. Alexander was reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom with barely concealed panic. Mr. Blackwood, there's a Victoria Blackwood here to see you. She says it's urgent and concerns the children. Alexander's blood turned to ice. Victoria, his ex-wife, who'd walked away with half his fortune and custody of a child who wasn't even his, had no business in his new life. The fact that she was here at all meant only one thing: trouble. Send her in. Victoria swept into his office like she owned it, which Alexander reflected bitterly. She partially had until their divorce was finalized. She was immaculately dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Hello, Alexander. You're looking well. Fatherhood suits you. What do you want, Victoria? She settled into the chair across from his desk without invitation, crossing her legs with calculated elegance. Straight to the point. I always admired that about you, even when it was inconvenient. Alexander waited, knowing that Victoria never did anything without multiple layers of strategy. She was like a chess player who thought 20 moves ahead, and he'd learned the hard way never to underestimate her. I want to discuss your new family situation, she continued, her tone conversational, but her eyes predatory. These children you've adopted. Luna and Tommy, isn't it? They're none of your concern. Victoria's laugh was like breaking crystal. Oh, but they are. You see, I've been doing some research since our divorce. Call it curiosity about the man who replaced me so quickly with ready-made children. The way she said ready-made made Alexander's jaw clench. Get to the point. The point, darling, is that these aren't just random orphans you rescued out of the goodness of your heart. They're your blood relatives, your father's granddaughter and grandson, your sister's children. Alexander kept his expression neutral, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. I don't know what you think you've discovered. Please, give me some credit. Victoria opened her purse and pulled out a tablet, swiping to reveal documents Alexander recognized with growing dread. Rebecca Blackwood, born 1985. Daughter of Charles Blackwood and Elena Vasquez. Mother to Luna Morrison, born 2015, and Thomas Morrison, born 2022. She continued swiping, revealing more documents, birth certificates, hospital records, even photographs. Your father's illegitimate daughter, living in poverty while you inherited billions. Her children, your niece and nephew, nearly dying on the streets while you lived in luxury. How did you? Money opens doors, Alexander. Even doors to sealed adoption records and private investigation files. The question isn't how I found out. The question is what I'm going to do with this information. Alexander forced himself to remain calm, though every instinct screamed at him to throw Victoria out of his office. What do you want? Victoria's smile widened, and Alexander saw the calculating predator he'd somehow missed during their marriage. I want what's fair. Our divorce settlement was based on the assumption that you had no other heirs. But if Luna and Tommy are entitled to inherit portions of the Blackwood fortune, and according to your father's trust documents, they are, then the value of your assets needs to be recalculated. The trap closed around Alexander with surgical precision. Victoria had done her homework, found the one vulnerability he hadn't anticipated. The family trust his father had established did indeed provide for any legitimate blood relatives. By adopting Luna and Tommy without disclosing their biological connection, he'd potentially violated the trust agreements. How much? He asked quietly. 50 million. She said it like she was ordering coffee. Consider it a finder's fee for locating your missing relatives. Have you ever felt completely cornered by someone who holds your happiness hostage? That's exactly where Alexander Blackwood found himself, facing a choice between his fortune and his family's peace. What would you pay to protect the people you love most? For Alexander Blackwood, the answer was about to cost him more than money. It was about to cost him his soul. Alexander stared across his desk at the woman who'd once shared his bed and his dreams, now transformed into something he barely recognized. Victoria's demand hung in the air like poison gas, filling the space between them with calculated malice. $50 million. The number wasn't chosen randomly. Victoria knew exactly how much pressure to apply without breaking his empire entirely. She was a master surgeon of greed, cutting deep enough to cause maximum pain while keeping the patient alive for future operations. You have 48 hours, Victoria said, standing and smoothing her skirt with casual confidence. After that, I take this information to your board of directors. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to learn their CEO has been hiding potential heirs to the company fortune. The threat hit its target with precision accuracy. Alexander's position as CEO of Blackwood Industries was unshakable, as long as he remained the sole heir to his father's empire. But if Luna and Tommy were revealed as Charles Blackwood's biological grandchildren, the company's board would demand investigations, audits, and potentially a complete restructuring of succession plans. More than that, though, Alexander thought about Luna herself. She'd finally found peace, finally started to heal from the trauma that had marked her early years. She was thriving in school, making friends, learning to be a normal 8-year-old instead of a survival machine. If this story became public, she'd be thrust into a media circus that could destroy everything they'd built together. The money will be in your account by Friday, Alexander said, each word tasting like ash. Victoria's smile was triumphant, but there was something else in her expression, something that looked almost like pity. I knew you'd see reason. You always were practical about protecting what mattered to you. This stays between us, Alexander said, his voice carrying a warning Victoria was smart enough to heed. Of course, I have no interest in destroying your little family. I just wanted what was mine. After she left, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring out at the city where he'd built his empire. $50 million, enough to fund hospitals, schools, entire communities, gone, just like that, to silence a woman who saw human connection as leverage and love as weakness. That evening, he found Luna and Tommy in the playroom, building an elaborate castle out of blocks. Luna was explaining architectural principles to her baby brother with the serious concentration she brought to everything, while Tommy babbled responses and knocked down walls with gleeful enthusiasm. Alexander. Luna looked up with that brilliant smile that never failed to light up his world. Look what Tommy and I built. It's a castle where families live together forever, and nobody can ever make them leave. The innocent words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Here was this remarkable child creating fantasy worlds where love was permanent and families were unbreakable, while he was paying blackmail to keep their real world from falling apart. It's beautiful, sweetheart, he managed, kneeling down to admire their construction. But as he watched Luna carefully rebuild the walls Tommy had knocked down, one question burned in Alexander's mind. How long could he keep paying the price of secrets before there was nothing left to protect? And more importantly, what would happen when Luna discovered that the truth about their family had become a weapon in someone else's hands? Have you ever been outsmarted by an 8-year-old? Alexander Blackwood was about to discover just how humbling that experience could be. The evening after Victoria's blackmail had been paid, Alexander sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey and questioning every decision he'd made since finding Luna and Tommy in that alley. $50 million. Gone. Just like that. All to protect a secret that was eating him alive from the inside. Luna appeared in the doorway, her long brown hair catching the lamplight, those piercing blue eyes studying him with an intensity that still caught him off guard after all these months. "You look sad," she said simply, patting across the Persian rug in her bare feet. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff, sweetheart. About Victoria?" Alexander's head snapped up. I heard you on the phone with Mr. Sterling earlier. You weren't exactly whispering." Luna climbed onto the leather chair across from his desk, tucking her legs under her. "She wanted money to keep quiet about who Tommy and I really are, didn't she?" The directness of the question stunned him. Sometimes he forgot that this little girl had survived on the streets, had learned to read people and situations like a textbook. "Luna, it's complicated." "No, it's not." Her voice carried a firmness that reminded him startlingly of Rebecca's letter. "Alexander, can I ask you something that might sound mean?" He nodded, bracing himself. "Are you embarrassed by us?" The question hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "Luna, absolutely not. You and Tommy are the best thing that ever happened to me." "Then why are we pretending we're not really family?" Alexander opened his mouth to give her the same explanation he'd been telling himself for months. Protection, privacy, their best interest. But under Luna's steady gaze, the words died in his throat. "I thought I was protecting you," he said finally. "From what?" "From people who might treat you differently? From reporters who might ask painful questions? From the truth?" The simple question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Luna slid off the chair and walked around the desk to stand beside him. "Alexander, remember what you told me when I had that nightmare about the streets? You said that hiding from scary things doesn't make them go away. It just makes them bigger in the dark." Alexander stared down at this remarkable child who somehow possessed wisdom he'd spent decades trying to learn. "Victoria hurt us today because we gave her power over our secret," Luna continued. "But what if it wasn't a secret? What if everyone already knew the truth? Then she couldn't hurt us anymore, could she?" The logic was so simple, so clear, that Alexander felt like an idiot for not seeing it himself. "You think we should tell everyone?" Luna smiled, that radiant expression that transformed her entire face. "I think we should stop being afraid of who we really are." 3 days later, Alexander Blackwood did something that shocked the entire business world. He called a press conference with no agenda, no product launch, no merger announcement, just a simple statement that he had a personal story to share. The conference room at Blackwood Industries buzzed with speculation. Financial reporters, gossip columnists, and business journalists filled every seat, cameras rolling, fingers poised over keyboards. What could the notoriously private billionaire possibly want to say? Alexander walked to the podium with Luna beside him, Tommy sleeping peacefully in his arms. The room fell silent. This wasn't what anyone had expected. 9 months ago, Alexander began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "I was walking through Manhattan during the first snowfall of winter. I had just finalized a bitter divorce. I felt empty, angry, and completely alone." He paused, looking down at Luna, who nodded encouragingly. "In an alley beside my building, I found 2 children. A 7-year-old girl trying to keep her baby brother alive with nothing but determination and love. I took them home that night thinking I was saving them." The room was dead quiet now, reporters hanging on every word. What I discovered later changed everything I thought I knew about my own life. These children, Luna and Thomas, aren't just 2 kids I decided to help. They're my niece and nephew. They're family I never knew existed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was the story of the year. Her father had a relationship 30 years ago that resulted in a daughter, Rebecca Blackwood. She chose to make her own way in the world rather than claim her place in our family. She married, had Luna, and died 3 years ago after a battle with cancer. Alexander's voice cracked slightly. Rebecca knew who I was. She could have reached out at any time, could have asked for help when she was struggling to raise her daughter alone, but she was too proud, and I was too oblivious to even know she existed. Luna stepped closer to the microphone. Can I say something? Alexander nodded, adjusting the microphone down to her height. My mom used to tell me that sometimes the best things come from the hardest times, Luna said, her clear voice carrying across the silent room. When my stepdad died and we lost our home, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen. But if none of that had happened, I never would have met Alexander. Tommy and I never would have found our real family. The reporter called out, Luna, were you angry when you found out Alexander was your uncle all along? Luna considered the question seriously. No. If he had found us before, maybe he wouldn't have understood how much we needed each other. Maybe we all had to go through the hard parts to be ready for the good parts. Another reporter. Mr. Blackwood, why reveal this now? You could have kept this private indefinitely. Alexander looked down at Luna, then back at the crowd. Because someone tried to use our family connection as a weapon against us. They threatened to expose the truth unless I paid them to stay quiet. My daughter here, he placed his hand on Luna's shoulder, reminded me that the truth isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to celebrate. So you're admitting to blackmail? I'm admitting to making a mistake. I let fear control my decisions instead of love. But that ends today. Luna leaned into the microphone one more time. We're not hiding anymore. We're proud to be Blackwoods, and we're proud to be a family. The room erupted in questions, but Alexander was already leading Luna toward the exit, Tommy still sleeping peacefully in his arms. The truth was out. Now they would face whatever came next, together. The headlines were brutal. Secret family revealed. From streets to boardroom. The Blackwood scandal. Homeless to Harris. 8-year-old's shocking inheritance. Alexander had expected the media frenzy, but seeing Luna's photograph on the front page of every tabloid in the city still made his blood boil. She was just a child, and already they were treating her like a commodity, speculating about trust funds and inheritance laws and what this meant for Blackwood Industries' stock price. But something unexpected was happening alongside the sensationalism. Letters were pouring in, thousands of them, not from reporters or lawyers or business rivals, but from ordinary people whose hearts had been touched by Luna's story. Dear Luna, Alexander read aloud from one of the letters as they sat together in the library. My name is Maria, and I'm 9 years old. I saw you on TV talking about taking care of your baby brother. You're the bravest person I've ever seen. I have a little sister too, and I want to be as good a big sister as you are a big brother. Luna smiled, carefully folding the letter and adding it to the growing pile. Can we write back to her? We can write back to all of them if you want. The phone rang constantly. Interview requests, book deals, movie rights. Alexander turned them all down. But when the Children's Services Department called, asking if Luna would consider speaking at their annual fundraising gala, she surprised him. I want to do it, she said firmly. Maybe other kids who are scared and alone will hear the story and know that things can get better. The board meeting that Friday was tense. Alexander sat at the head of the polished conference table, facing 12 of the most powerful business leaders in New York. Several of them had been calling for his resignation since the press conference. Alexander, said board member Harold Morrison, his voice cold with disapproval, your personal situation has created significant complications for this company. The media attention, the questions about inheritance and succession, the impact on our stock price. Our stock price is up 12% since the announcement. Alexander interrupted calmly. Morrison faltered. That's not the point. The point is that this company was built by Charles Blackwood, my father, who apparently understood the value of family better than any of us realized. Alexander stood, looking around the table at faces he'd known for years. Luna and Tommy Blackwood are my children now, legally and in every way that matters. If any of you have a problem with that, you're welcome to tender your resignation. The room fell silent. It was Margaret Chen, the longest-serving board member, who spoke first. Alexander, I've watched you run this company for 8 years. You've made us all very wealthy. But I've never seen you as happy as you looked standing next to that little girl at the press conference. One by one, the other board members nodded their agreement. That evening, Alexander found Luna in her room, writing thank you notes to the people who had sent letters. How was your meeting? She asked without looking up. Better than expected. How did you know it would work out? Luna finally looked up, her blue eyes twinkling with mischief. Because you taught me that when you're doing the right thing, the right people will support you. And if they don't support you, they weren't the right people anyway. Alexander shook his head in amazement. Where do you get this stuff? From you, Luna said simply. You just forgot it for a while. But that's okay. Sometimes grown-ups need kids to remind them what they already know. 1 year later, Alexander stood at the same window where he'd first spotted Luna and Tommy in the snow. But this time, he wasn't looking down at an alley. He was watching his children play in Central Park below, their laughter carrying up through the crisp December air. Tommy had taken his first steps 3 months ago, stumbling across the penthouse floor straight into Luna's waiting arms. His first word hadn't been dada or mama. It had been wuna, his attempt at saying Luna's name. The bond between the siblings remained as strong as ever, though now it was nurtured by security instead of desperation. Luna was 9 now, brilliant and confident and still possessed of that remarkable wisdom that continued to amaze everyone who met her. She'd spoken at 4 charity events in the past year, raising over $2 million for homeless children. Publishers were begging to buy the rights to her story, but she'd told Alexander she wasn't ready yet. Maybe when I'm older, she'd said. Right now, I just want to be a kid. The doorbell chimed, interrupting his thoughts. Alexander opened it to find an unexpected visitor. Victoria, looking significantly less polished than she had a year ago. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair less than perfect. Hello, Alexander, Victoria. What are you doing here? She shifted uncomfortably. I needed to apologize for what I did, for trying to hurt your family. Alexander studied his ex-wife's face, searching for signs of manipulation. Instead, he saw something he'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. What changed? He asked. I saw Luna's speech at the Children's Hospital Gala, the one where she talked about forgiveness. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. She said that holding on to anger is like carrying rocks in your backpack. It just makes the journey harder. Alexander remembered that speech. Luna had been talking about forgiving Cheryl, the stepmother who had abandoned them. The audience had been in tears. She's remarkable, Victoria continued. And watching you with her, Alexander, I never saw you look at Sophia the way you look at Luna. Not once. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. I spent the $50 million, Victoria said suddenly. Every penny. On stupid things. Meaningless things. I thought it would make me happy, but it just made me more empty than before. Huh. Victoria, I'm not asking for money, she said quickly. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong about everything. Luna and Tommy, they saved you. And maybe if I'd been capable of real love instead of just wanting things, we might have saved each other. After she left, Alexander found Luna reading in the library, Tommy playing with blocks at her feet. Was that Victoria at the door? Luna asked without looking up from her book. How did you... I saw her from my window, She looked sad. Alexander sat down beside them. She came to apologize. Luna nodded as if this wasn't surprising at all. Good. Carrying around guilt is heavy. She'll feel better now. Luna, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found you that night? If someone else had walked by, or if I'd ignored you like I almost did? Luna considered this seriously, as she did all his questions. Sometimes. But then I remember what Mommy used to say, that love always finds a way. Maybe if you hadn't found us that night, it would have been the next night or the next week. Maybe we would have met some other way, but we would have found each other eventually because we're family. She closed her book and looked at him with those piercing blue eyes that still took his breath away. Besides, she added with a grin, you needed us just as much as we needed you. And love is like that. It shows up exactly when everyone is ready for it. Alexander pulled both children close, marveling once again at the wisdom of the little girl who had taught him that the greatest wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was in this moment, right here, right now. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and soft, covering the city in pristine white. But this time, Alexander wasn't watching it alone.